The Galactic Academy was the most prestigious institution in the universe. Located on a floating asteroid surrounded by swirling nebulas and distant star systems, the Academy trained warriors, strategists, and scholars from across the galaxy. It was a place where the strongest, the smartest, and the most skilled beings came to compete, learn, and grow. The Academy's reputation was built on its rigorous selection process and its unbeatable record in the Galactic Tournament. No one questioned its judgment, until now. At the start of the new training year, a human named Lena was brought to the Academy. Lena was not like the other students. She was shorter, weaker, and slower than most of the other alien species who filled the Academy's halls. But there was one thing she had that the others didn't: an unyielding drive. Lena had earned her place at the Academy, not because of her physical strength, but because of her remarkable intellect and resilience. However, no one seemed to see that. As Lena stood before the Academy's headmaster, a tall, four-armed alien with a face like a rock formation, she couldn't help but feel a little out of place. The headmaster, who had overseen hundreds of students in his lifetime, had seen humans before. He knew what they were capable of, very little in comparison to the other species in the galaxy. Still, he had agreed to let her in, but only because of the Academy's policy of accepting one human per year. "Lena, you are assigned to Team G13, the headmaster declared, his deep voice echoing in the quiet room. "It is a group of students who have struggled to perform at the level we expect. You will find them difficult to work with, but I trust you will manage. Remember, this is a training academy. If you prove yourself, you might be able to do something great, but do not expect to win the Galactic Tournament with this team." Lena nodded, trying to hide the disappointment she felt. She had heard the whispers in the halls, the rumors about how Team G13 was the weakest team in the Academy's history. The students on this team were from species that had little combat experience, poor teamwork skills, or physical limitations. She knew that she would have to work harder than ever to make a difference. When Lena arrived at the team's training room, the other members were already there. She was greeted by silence as she walked in. The members of Team G13 were all seated, staring at her with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Each one was from a different part of the galaxy, each with their own unique abilities and struggles. There was Kale, a hulking creature from a race known for its brute strength, but he was often too emotional and struggled to control his anger. Then there was Tali, a small, fast species, but she lacked physical strength and was often too timid to stand up for herself. Jara was an alien whose people had evolved to be highly intelligent, but her species was physically frail, making her vulnerable in battle. And lastly, there was Rook, an alien from a species with incredible agility, but no real combat training. They were all considered weak by the Academy's standards, and they were all surprised to see Lena walk in. Lena could sense their doubts immediately. She wasn't one of them. She wasn't an alien. She wasn't a genetically modified warrior or a highly trained fighter. She was just human. And humans, as far as the galaxy's elite were concerned, were weak. Her heart sank as she realized how much she would have to prove. Despite the cold reception, Lena stood tall. She didn't let their looks discourage her. She was determined to change their minds, and she would do whatever it took. She would show them that strength wasn't just about size, speed, or the number of weapons you could wield. Strength was about how much you were willing to fight for what you believed in, how much you were willing to push yourself, even when the odds were stacked against you. "All right," Lena said, trying to sound confident as she stood in front of the team. "We're all here for one reason: to win. The headmaster may not believe in us, but I do. We can do this if we work together. But first, we need to learn to trust each other." There was a long silence as the team members exchanged glances. Lena could see their hesitation. They didn't believe in themselves, let alone in each other. But she wasn't about to give up on them. They were her team now, and she was going to make sure they knew it. "You're all capable in your own way," she continued, her voice steady. "We all have something to offer. Kale, you're strong, but you need to control that strength. Tali, you're fast, but you need to be more confident. Jara, your intelligence is your weapon, and Rook, your agility is your strength. Together, we can be unstoppable. But only if we work as one. The team members looked at her, their faces still uncertain. Lena knew that gaining their trust wouldn't be easy. It would take time. But she was ready for the challenge. She had to be. If she could inspire them to believe in themselves, they might just have a chance to prove that even the weakest team could rise above the rest. With that, Lena began the first training session. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. They would have to work hard, but she was sure they could do it, together. Lena stood at the edge of the training field, her heart pounding as she looked at her new teammates. She had only just met them, but already she could feel the weight of their doubts pressing on her shoulders. Team G13 was considered the weakest team in the entire academy, and it didn't take long for Lena to understand why. Kale, the giant from the Zralkian race, towered over everyone. His body was a mass of muscles, and his strength was legendary. But there was a problem. Kale's temper was as big as his size. He often lost control in training, smashing things when he got angry. His rage made him dangerous, but it also made him unpredictable. His teammates were afraid of him, and Lena could see why. Tali, a small but fast creature from the Kyanid race, had quick reflexes and could outrun almost anyone, but she lacked the strength to back up her speed. She often held back in training, afraid of getting hurt. Her small size also made her an easy target for opponents in combat. Lena noticed that Tali seemed to shrink away from her teammates, as though she didn't believe in her own abilities. Jara, the quiet one, was an alien from a species known for its sharp minds. Jara was brilliant when it came to tactics and strategy, but her body was weak. She wasn't built for combat, and her frailty made her an easy target in physical confrontations. Jara often kept to herself, lost in her thoughts, but Lena could tell she was haunted by the idea that she wasn't enough. Rook, an alien with unmatched agility, could move faster than anyone in the academy. But there was one big problem. Rook had never fought before. His species valued agility above all else, but they had no real combat training. He was awkward in battle, and his movements lacked purpose. Lena could see the frustration in his eyes as he tried to keep up with the others, struggling to find his place on the team. Lena knew that if she wanted to help them, she needed to get past their weaknesses and bring out their strengths. She couldn't rely on the traditional methods that the academy used to train its elite fighters. No, this was different. Her team was different. They were a collection of misfits, each with their own flaws, but Lena believed they could still become something great. They just needed to believe it themselves. She called them together for their first team meeting. The training hall was quiet, with only the soft hum of the lights overhead breaking the silence. Kale sat with his arms crossed, staring at the floor. Tali was fidgeting nervously in the corner, her eyes darting around. Jara sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, deep in thought. Rook was tapping his foot impatiently, his gaze shifting between his teammates. Lena cleared her throat, trying to get their attention. "We need to talk about how we're going to move forward," she said, her voice steady but firm. "The academy doesn't believe in us. The headmaster doesn't believe in us. But I do. And that's why we're going to start training differently. We're not going to focus on what we can't do. We're going to focus on what we can do." There was a long pause as her teammates exchanged uncertain glances. Lena could feel the skepticism in the air, but she pushed on. "Cal, you have strength, but strength without control is useless. We need to teach you how to harness that power. Instead of smashing things when you're angry, we'll focus on using your strength in a way that will make you unstoppable in battle." Cal's brow furrowed, but he didn't argue. He was a fighter at heart, and there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. Maybe this human knew something he didn't. "Tali," Lena continued, "you're fast, really fast. But speed without confidence won't get us anywhere. I want you to focus on using that speed to outsmart our opponents. When you're in a fight, don't just run. Think about how you can outmaneuver them. You have a gift, Tali, but you have to believe in it. Tali hesitated but nodded, a small spark of determination in her eyes. She had always been told she was too small, too weak. But maybe Lena was right. Maybe she could use her speed to her advantage. Jara, Lena said, turning to the quiet alien, your mind is your greatest weapon. But you can't think your way out of everything. We need to combine your intelligence with the physical skills we have. I want you to come up with strategies that play to our strengths, and I'll make sure the team follows them. Jara looked up, her eyes widening. It was clear that no one had ever asked her to lead before, but Lena believed she had the potential. And Rook, Lena said, her gaze locking with the agile alien. You're fast, too, but you don't know how to fight. You're not here to follow the others. You're here to learn how to use your agility in battle. You can dodge, you can move, but now you need to learn how to fight with purpose. We're going to turn your weaknesses into our greatest strength. Rook nodded, though he still seemed unsure. He wasn't used to being in a team, let alone one that needed so much work. But there was something in Lena's voice that made him want to try. Lena took a deep breath. I know it won't be easy, but if we work together, we can do this. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be better than we were yesterday. We are going to prove to everyone that we are not the weakest team. We are going to show them that we can win. The team sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Lena's words settling over them. Slowly, they started to believe her. Maybe, just maybe, they could do it. It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning. And that was enough for Lena. She had taken the first step toward changing everything. The first few days of training were harder than Lena had expected. Team G13 had no idea how to work together, and their lack of trust in each other was painfully obvious. But Lena wasn't going to give up. She had made a promise to herself that she would bring them together, no matter what. Their first session was a disaster. Kale, the massive Zhralkian, couldn't control his strength, and every time he tried to lift a training dummy, he ended up breaking it. Tali was too nervous to make any real moves, afraid she'd hurt someone. Rook couldn't stop running around, his movements fast but aimless. And Jara, always deep in thought, couldn't seem to focus on anything long enough to be helpful. Lena was exhausted after just 1 hour of training. She could feel the frustration rising inside her, but she refused to show it. They were all struggling, but she had to remind herself that this was the beginning. They were learning. After that first session, Lena called them together again. She knew that if they didn't start learning to trust each other, they'd never make it through the academy, let alone win the galactic tournament. Okay, that wasn't great, Lena said, trying to keep her tone light. But that's okay. We're just getting started. Kale grunted and crossed his arms, looking irritated. Tali was fidgeting, glancing around the room. Jara's eyes were downcast, and Rook was bouncing on his heels, clearly impatient. Lena took a deep breath and tried to remain calm. Let's break this down. Kale, you're strong, but we need to focus on control. You don't have to be the biggest or the fastest to win a fight. You just need to know when and where to use your strength. Kale rolled his eyes. I know how to fight, human. I don't need lessons on control. Lena smiled, not backing down. I know you can fight, Kale, but to be a great fighter, you need to be more than just powerful. You need to be smart too. And that's where we'll start. Kale snorted but said nothing more. Lena wasn't about to let him throw her off course. She turned to Tali, who was still nervously shifting from foot to foot. Tali, you've got speed, but you have to use it smartly. You're not just a runner. In battle, you need to outthink your opponents. Speed isn't only about getting away. It's about getting in close, hitting fast, and getting out before they can respond. We're going to work on that today. Tali nodded, though she still looked uncertain. Lena could see the fear in her eyes. The fear of being too small, too weak. But Lena believed in her. Turning to Jara, Lena saw the alien still lost in her thoughts, clearly overwhelmed by everything. Jara, your mind is your weapon. You don't need to throw punches to win. I need you to help us plan. You can outthink anyone here. Let's use that to our advantage. Your job is to create strategies we can use in battle. You'll be our brains, while the rest of us focus on getting it done. Jara looked up, her eyes brightening slightly. You really think I can do that? Lena nodded. Absolutely. You just need to trust yourself. Rook was still moving around, his steps quick but without purpose. And you, Rook, Lena said, looking at him. You're fast, but you don't have control. You don't know how to focus that speed in battle. We're going to teach you how to move with purpose, to use that speed not just to dodge, but to attack. We'll start slow, but you'll get there. Rook stopped moving and looked at her, his face full of determination. I can do that, he said, almost to himself. Lena smiled, relieved that her words were finally starting to sink in. Good. Now let's put everything together. We'll do some team drills. Kale, you'll focus on control. Tali, work on your speed and quick strikes. Jara, help us come up with a plan. Rook, you'll learn how to focus your moves, and I'll be here to guide you. The team set to work. Kale began with a set of exercises to improve his control, using smaller, lighter objects instead of the heavy training dummies. Tali worked on dodging and striking with precision, using her small size to her advantage. Jara came up with a plan to use the team's strengths, creating a strategy for each of them to follow in a simulated battle. Rook worked on focusing his movements, learning to control his speed, and use it for more than just running around. It was slow going at first, and the training was tough. There were mistakes, missteps, and plenty of frustration. But Lena didn't let it get to her. She stayed patient, reminding her team that it was all part of the process. As the hours passed, she saw small improvements. Kel's control over his strength was getting better. Tali's strikes were faster and more accurate. Jara's strategies were becoming more effective, and Rook's movements were more focused. By the end of the day, Lena was exhausted, but there was a spark of hope in her chest. They weren't there yet, but they were getting closer. It wasn't going to be easy, but Lena had no doubt that they were capable of more than anyone thought. The academy still didn't believe in them. The headmaster still thought they were a joke, but Lena wasn't going to let that stop her. She knew that together, they could do the impossible. They were the weakest team, but they weren't going to stay that way for long. The days turned into weeks, and Team G13 was slowly starting to change. They were far from perfect, but they were starting to understand each other. Each practice session revealed something new. Kale was learning to control his strength. Tali was becoming more confident. Jara was devising smarter strategies, and Rook was beginning to focus his speed into controlled movements. Lena felt the progress, no matter how small, and that kept her going. But the academy had its own idea of what progress looked like. One morning, the team was called into the main training hall, a vast arena used for serious combat simulations. The room was filled with students from the academy's other teams, all eager to see the next match. The headmaster stood at the front, his serious gaze sweeping over the room. Today, he announced in his deep, gravelly voice, "You will face your first challenge. The galactic tournament is fast approaching, and each team must prove they are ready. Team G13, you will be facing Team Z9. Lena's heart skipped a beat. Team Z9 was one of the top teams in the academy, known for their precise tactics and unbeatable combat skills. They were strong, fast, and well-coordinated. Everything Team G13 was not. Do your best, the headmaster added with a slight smirk. I don't expect much, but I'll be watching. The challenge was set. Team G13 had no choice but to face Z9 in a simulated combat scenario, where they would be scored based on how well they executed their strategy and teamwork. As the team gathered in the preparation room, the reality of what they were about to face began to settle in. Kale stood with his arms crossed, his expression hard to read. Tali fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting from teammate to teammate. Jara was already calculating, her mind running through possible strategies, while Rook was bouncing on his heels, his nerves showing despite his earlier progress. Lena took a deep breath. This was their first real test. She couldn't let them doubt themselves now. "All right, listen up," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We've been training hard for this. I know it won't be easy, but we got something that Z9 doesn't. We trust each other. We know what we're capable of. And today, we're going to show the Academy what Team G13 can do." The team nodded, though their faces still held some uncertainty. But Lena didn't let that stop her. They were ready. They had to be. The simulation began. In the center of the massive training arena, the two teams stood facing each other, separated by a barrier that would vanish when the match started. Team Z9, with their sharp uniforms and synchronized movements, looked like they had done this 100 times before. They were calm, collected, and radiated confidence. Team G13, on the other hand, looked mismatched and unsure. But Lena knew they had something that Z9 lacked, the element of surprise. The barrier dropped, and the battle began. Kale was the first to act. The moment the match started, he rushed toward the center, using his raw strength to push through the incoming attacks from Z9's frontliners. It wasn't perfect, but his power was undeniable. Z9's team was quick to react, but they weren't expecting Cale's unpredictable style. His anger was controlled this time, and Lena could see the difference. It was as though he was finally using his power on purpose. Tali darted around the perimeter, using her speed to her advantage. She zoomed past Z9's slower members, striking quickly before they could react. Her blows weren't heavy, but they were fast and precise. She was no longer afraid to engage, to put herself out there. Her confidence had grown over the last few weeks, and now she was showing it. Meanwhile, Jara was coordinating the team, her voice calm as she directed their movements. She had anticipated Z9's strategies and was already setting traps for them. Tali moved to the left. She called out, "Kale, cover her." Rook flanked them from behind. Rook, still not as skilled in combat, used his agility to weave in and out of the battle. He dodged attacks, staying just out of reach and looking for openings. He wasn't yet a master at fighting, but his speed made him hard to hit, and he was learning to focus his energy. Lena watched the team in action, her heart racing. This wasn't perfect. They were still rough around the edges, but they were working together. Each member was playing their part, supporting the others in ways Lena hadn't seen before. They weren't just reacting to Z9's attacks. They were setting up their own counterattacks, using their strengths to cover each other's weaknesses. Z9 was good, but they weren't invincible. As the battle raged on, Team G13 started to gain ground. Z9's members were beginning to lose their cool, frustrated by the unpredictability of their opponents. They had expected to dominate, to win easily, but they hadn't counted on the teamwork and creativity that Lena's team brought to the table. Kale tackled Z9's leader, knocking him off balance, while Tali took advantage of the opening to land a fast strike. Jara's strategies had set them up perfectly, and Rook's quick thinking had allowed him to get in the perfect position at just the right moment. For the first time in the match, Z9 was on the defensive. The match ended with the sound of the bell signaling the end of the simulation. Team G13 stood, panting and bruised, while Team Z9 looked stunned. They hadn't expected to be pushed this far. Lena walked forward, a smile tugging at her lips. "Good job, team," she said, trying to hide the pride she felt. "You were amazing out there." They had done it. They hadn't won, but they had shown the Academy something they hadn't expected. Team G13 was capable of far more than anyone had imagined. As the team gathered to leave the arena, Lena couldn't help but think that this was only the beginning. They still had a long way to go, but today they had taken a huge step forward. And Lena knew that, together, they could accomplish anything. The days after the battle with Team Z9 were filled with mixed emotions. On one hand, Team G13 had done better than anyone had expected. They had proven that they could hold their ground against one of the top teams in the academy, and that was something to be proud of. But on the other hand, they hadn't won, and that fact kept weighing heavily on Lena's mind. Despite their progress, the academy staff still looked down on them. The headmaster barely acknowledged their effort, and the other teams continued to mock them. Lena couldn't help but feel frustrated by the lack of recognition. They had fought hard, and yet no one seemed to believe in their potential. As the next week rolled in, Lena pushed her team harder than ever. They were determined to prove everyone wrong. Their next challenge was fast approaching. The final phase of the Galactic Tournament training, a test that would determine which teams were ready for the real competition. One evening, after a particularly exhausting training session, Lena gathered the team for a strategy meeting. The fatigue was evident in their eyes. Kettle's shoulders were slumped, Tali was fidgeting with her equipment, and Rook was tapping his foot impatiently. Kiara, as always, was deep in thought, her fingers tracing patterns in the air. "All right," Lena said, her voice cutting through the tired silence. "Tomorrow, we'll face another team in a simulated battle. It's going to be harder than anything we've done before, but we've trained for this. We know each other's strengths and weaknesses. Now, it's time to put everything together." She paused, making sure to catch each of their eyes. "We've come a long way, and I know that we're ready for this. So let's make it count." Kale grunted but nodded. "No one's expecting us to win, right?" Lena smiled, though it was a little tight. "Exactly. No one expects us to win. But that's what's going to make this so much sweeter when we do." The team was quiet for a moment, but Lena could see the spark of determination in their eyes. They weren't just fighting for the tournament anymore. They were fighting for something more. They were fighting to prove they could be more than the underdogs, more than the team everyone thought would fail. The next day, the team entered the arena for their final training test before the Galactic Tournament. The pressure was intense. The air seemed thick with the weight of everyone's expectations, or, more accurately, the lack of them. Team G13 stood at one side of the arena, while their opponents, a team called the Scorpions, took position on the other. The Scorpions were known for their ruthless style. They were a team that played dirty, using any advantage they could find to win. They had a reputation for breaking the rules and exploiting their opponents' weaknesses. Lena glanced at her team, her eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. This was it. This was their chance to show everyone they were more than just the weakest team. As the match began, the Scorpions immediately went on the offensive. They were quick, organized, and ruthless, launching attacks from every angle. Team G13 struggled at first to keep up. Kale was trying to use his strength, but the Scorpions' team members were dodging and weaving, making it difficult for him to land a hit. Tali was running circles around the opponents, but the Scorpions were fast too. Rook couldn't seem to find the right moment to strike, his moves still too wild and uncontrolled. And Jara was overwhelmed. Her mind was racing, trying to come up with a strategy that would work, but the Scorpions were so unpredictable that she couldn't find a way to coordinate the team. Lena's heart pounded as she watched the chaos unfold. The Scorpions were taking advantage of every mistake, every moment of hesitation. Team G13 was being torn apart. But then, something unexpected happened. Kale, furious and frustrated by the constant dodging, snapped. But instead of charging blindly, he held his ground. For the first time, he used his size and strength as a shield. He blocked the Scorpions' attacks, using his body to protect Tali, Rook, and Jara. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for his team. And that shift in mentality made all the difference. Tali, noticing Cal's sacrifice, sprang into action. She moved faster than she ever had before, her small size allowing her to slip past the scorpion's defenses. Her strikes were swift, her timing perfect. She used her speed to confuse the scorpions, making them second-guess their moves. Rook, finally understanding how to channel his agility, followed suit. He darted around the arena, his speed now focused on precision. He wasn't just avoiding hits anymore. He was actively looking for openings. Jara, calm and collected, seized the moment. Kale, move left, she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. Tali, take the lead. Rook, distract them from behind. The plan clicked. Team G13 was finally working as one unit, each member playing their part. Kale held the line, blocking attacks. Tali used her speed to confuse and strike. Rook darted in and out, keeping the scorpions off balance. And Jara, always a step ahead, guided them with clear instructions. The tide of the battle began to turn. The scorpions, no longer sure of their advantage, started making mistakes. They grew sloppy, underestimating Team G13's ability to adapt. Kel's strength, Tali's speed, Jara's strategy, and Rook's agility all came together in a way that the scorpions had never expected. As the final seconds of the match ticked down, Team G13 managed to trap the scorpions in a corner. With one final, coordinated strike, they took them down. The bell rang, signaling the end of the match. The arena was filled with stunned silence. Team G13 stood panting, bruised but victorious. They had done it. They had beaten the scorpions. Lena looked at her team, her heart swelling with pride. They had proved something, not just to the academy, but to themselves. They weren't just the weakest team anymore. They were a force to be reckoned with. And as the headmaster watched from the sidelines, Lena knew that the real battle was just beginning. The victory over the scorpions had been a turning point for Team G13. No one, least of all their opponents, had expected them to win, but they had done it. The academy was starting to take notice. Even the headmaster, who had previously dismissed them as weak, couldn't ignore the fact that they had beaten one of the top teams. But with the growing attention came new challenges. Other teams started to take Team G13 more seriously, and with that came a new sense of pressure. Lena could see the stress building on her teammates. The weight of their success was heavy, and everyone knew the next match could be even harder. It was just a few days after their win when the next announcement came. The academy had set up a special exhibition match against the reigning champions, Team A1. The champions were undefeated, with a long list of victories to their name. They were everything Team G13 was not: experienced, well-coordinated, and feared across the galaxy. The idea of facing them terrified Lena, but it was also a chance to prove just how far they had come. The team gathered in the preparation room, the air thick with tension. Kale was pacing, his fists clenched. Tali was staring at the floor, her fingers nervously tugging at the hem of her sleeve. Rook was bouncing from foot to foot, trying to burn off the nervous energy. Jara was deep in thought, working through different strategies in her mind. Lena knew this match would be their hardest yet. Team A1 was no joke. They had a fighter who could manipulate energy fields, another who could control gravity, and a strategist who never lost a battle. But Lena also knew that her team had something they didn't: determination. Team A1 might be skilled, but they didn't have the bond that Team G13 had forged over the past few weeks. That was their secret weapon. "We've been through a lot to get here," Lena said, her voice firm but reassuring. "We know what we're capable of. Team A1 might be the champions, but that doesn't mean we can't win." Kale stopped pacing and looked at Lena, his face serious. "How do we even stand a chance? They've beaten everyone. No one's even come close." Lena met his gaze. "I know they're tough, but that doesn't mean they're unbeatable. We're not going to win by matching them move for move. We're going to win by outsmarting them. We've trained to be unpredictable. We've trained to think outside the box. We've trained to adapt." Jara spoke up, her voice calm but confident. "We know their weaknesses. Team A1 relies too heavily on their power. If we can take away their confidence, we can throw them off balance. Tali nodded. We need to stay fast and mobile. If we keep moving, they won't be able to focus on one target. And we need to use our teamwork, Rook added. We're stronger together. If we work as a unit, they won't be able to handle us. Lena smiled, proud of how far they had come. Exactly. We stick to the plan, work together, and do what we do best. Trust each other. That's how we win. With the plan set, the team entered the arena. The air was electric, filled with the buzz of excited spectators. Team A1 stood on the other side, their confident expressions only adding to the pressure. They looked like they belonged there. They were champions, after all. But as the match began, something unexpected happened. Team G13 wasn't intimidated. They moved with purpose, their steps sure and steady. Kale charged first, using his strength not to attack, but to create a distraction. He pushed forward, blocking the path of Team A1's gravity controller, forcing her to focus all her attention on keeping him from overwhelming her. Tali darted to the left, using her speed to zip past the defenders and strike at the energy manipulator, her quick hits forcing him to back away from his control of the arena. Meanwhile, Rook moved in and out of the shadows, his speed unpredictable and his strikes precise. He was the perfect distraction, always keeping the champions on edge, never allowing them to settle into a rhythm. Jara, the brains of the operation, was calm in the chaos. She watched every move carefully, analyzing the way Team A1 responded. She could see their weakness. Team A1 had become too focused on their individual powers, leaving gaps in their defense. They were used to overwhelming opponents with their abilities, but they weren't ready for a team that moved as one. Kale, move left. Tali, hit them from the rear. Jara called out, her voice cutting through the battle. The plan was working. Team A1, once so confident, was starting to falter. Their moves were less fluid, their attacks more desperate. They couldn't keep up with the fast-paced, unpredictable strategy Team G13 had adopted. Then, as the final moments of the match approached, Lena saw their opportunity. Team A1's energy manipulator had taken his focus off Kale for just a moment, and that was all they needed. Kale moved quickly, charging at the energy controller, forcing him to react. Tali and Rook immediately followed, using the opening to strike from different angles. The champions were disoriented. They tried to recover, but it was too late. The coordinated attacks from Team G13 had thrown them off balance completely. And in that final moment, the bell rang. The match was over. The arena went silent. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the crowd erupted into applause. Team G13 had won. They had beaten the champions. Lena stood, breathless, her heart racing. She looked at her team, who were all breathing hard but smiling. They had done it. They had proven that their hard work, their teamwork, and their belief in each other were more than enough to overcome even the most experienced opponents. As the headmaster watched from the sidelines, his expression unreadable, Lena knew that this victory had changed everything. The academy couldn't ignore them anymore. They weren't just the weakest team. They were a team to be reckoned with. And as the crowd continued to cheer, Lena felt a sense of pride swell within her. This was only the beginning. They had faced the champions and won, but there was still a long road ahead. And Lena knew that, together, they could take on anything that came their way. The victory over Team A1 sent shockwaves through the academy. The impossible had happened. Team G13, once considered the weakest group, had defeated the reigning champions, and now, every team in the academy was watching them closely. The underdogs had finally proven themselves. But the path ahead was still full of challenges. Lena felt the weight of it all. Her team had come so far, but there was still one final hurdle left. The galactic tournament itself. The stakes were higher than ever, and every team in the galaxy would be watching. Lena knew this wasn't just about winning the tournament anymore. It was about showing the world what Team G13 was capable of. The final training sessions before the tournament were intense. The team was feeling the pressure, but they had learned to lean on each other. Kale, who had once been angry and reckless, now fought with purpose and control. Tali, always quick and agile, was becoming more confident in her ability to lead the charge. Rook's movements were smoother, more focused, and Jara's strategies had become sharper, her ability to read the flow of battle nearly flawless. But there was something else driving them forward now. They weren't just fighting for victory, they were fighting for each other. They had become a family of sorts, and that bond was stronger than any individual skill or power. As the day of the tournament approached, the team gathered in their preparation room. It was their final moment to talk and strategize before stepping onto the biggest stage of their lives. Lena stood in front of them, her heart swelling with pride. "We've already done something that no one thought was possible. We've beaten the champions. We've beaten the odds. Now it's time to finish what we started." Kale looked around at his teammates, his face serious but full of determination. "We're ready. No one can stop us." Tali gave a small, confident smile. "We've got each other's backs. That's what makes us strong." Rook nodded. "We've come this far. Let's finish it." Jara spoke quietly, but with a calm certainty. "We know their weaknesses. We know how to adapt. Let's stick to the plan and stay unpredictable. We'll win this together." Lena smiled, feeling the unity in the room. "That's right. We don't need to be the strongest team. We just need to be the smartest, and we're going to do that by trusting each other." With a final nod of agreement, they all headed to the arena. The atmosphere was electric. Hundreds of spectators filled the stands, and the tension in the air was thick. The Galactic Tournament was one of the most prestigious events in the galaxy, and every match would be watched by millions. Lena and her team stood on the field, facing their opponents. The final round would be against the best team in the galaxy, Team Omega. They were fast, strong, and had an undefeated record. Every move they made was precise and calculated. They were the perfect team, and they were expected to win it all. But Lena wasn't afraid. She had confidence in her team. They had faced impossible odds before, and they had always found a way to overcome them. The match began, and immediately, Team Omega took control. They were everything Lena had expected: organized, fast, and aggressive. But Team G13 wasn't going to back down. They had learned how to use their weaknesses to their advantage. Kale, using his brute strength, charged forward, not to attack, but to block the path of Omega's strongest fighter. He made sure to take up as much space as possible, forcing the Omega fighter to expend energy trying to get around him. It wasn't flashy, but it was effective. Tali, who had always been quick, darted around the Omega team, keeping them on their toes. She didn't stop moving, confusing them with her speed and agility. Every time they thought they had her, she was already gone, striking from a new angle. Rook used his quickness to outmaneuver the Omega team's defenders, staying just one step ahead of them. His strikes were timed perfectly, landing where they were least expected. And Jara was the calm in the chaos. She watched everything, directing her team with her sharp mind. She saw the openings before anyone else and was able to guide the team into perfect synchronization. Lena stayed back, coordinating their movements, watching for any weaknesses in Team Omega's defense. She knew that their only chance was to outsmart the opponents, to turn the tide before Omega could get comfortable. As the battle wore on, it became clear that Team Omega wasn't used to being thrown off balance. They were used to dominating, to having complete control. But Team G13 wasn't going to let that happen. The final moments of the match were a blur. Team Omega, realizing they were being outpaced and outmaneuvered, started to panic. They made mistakes, small ones at first, but they added up. Tali landed a quick blow on Omega's top fighter, forcing him to retreat. Kale pushed through to the center, distracting their energy manipulator long enough for Rook to get in a critical strike. And then, with one final push, Jara saw the opening she had been waiting for. "Now," she shouted. The team moved as one, their combined efforts overwhelming Team Omega. With a well-timed strike, Kale knocked the Omega leader off balance, and Tali finished it with a perfectly executed hit. The bell rang. The arena was silent for a moment. And then the crowd erupted into cheers. Team G13 had done it. They had won the galactic tournament. Lena stood, her heart racing, looking at her team. They were all breathless, their faces bruised and tired, but they were smiling. They had made it. "We did it," Kale said, his voice full of awe. Lena smiled, tears of pride welling in her eyes. "We didn't just win. We proved that no matter where we start, it's what we do together that matters." The crowd continued to cheer, and the team stood tall, knowing that their journey had just begun. They weren't just the weakest team anymore. They were champions.